Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to take a look at 5 of the most iconic divers still available. Just to recap, 2 weeks ago I released the 5 iconic chronographs video where I discussed what I felt were the 5 most important and iconic chronographs that you can still purchase today. The first watch on this list is also the one that I anticipate will be the most contentious, and for the number 5 slot in most iconic dive watches, I've selected the new Seiko SLA-017, which is a re-edition of the 1965 diver 62 MAS, was the reference. This was Seiko's first dive watch released in 1965, and many vintage collectors respect it and seek it out. This watch was just reintroduced this year at Basel World 2017. However, despite a positive reception to the watch, the price tag, which I believe is €3,800, so approximately the same in dollars, I have to say, if you are in the market for a Seiko dive watch and you dig that heritage vintage feel, but you don't want to spend $4,000 on this, they did re-release the Seiko Turtle last year. That Seiko Turtle is now called the Prospex with an X. I believe that's the SRP 777, and that watch is under $500. Now that watch uses the cushion case, and it does have a hand winding and hacking movement. That means, unlike the cheapest Seiko 5s, which you cannot manually wind, you have to just kind of shake them. The Prospex series, you can wind with the crown, and when you pull the crown out to set it, the second hand will stop so that you can set it very precisely. Those are kind of, I won't call them premium features, but not available on Seiko's entry-level automatics like the Seiko 5 line, which uses the 7S26 movement. Of course, the re-edition of the 62 MAS also has these features and uses a much higher quality movement as well. Now, it is worth mentioning that Seiko also released sort of modernized versions of the 62 MAS that are much more affordable. They've got the SPB 051 and 053, which are just different recolors of a watch styled very similarly to the original 62 MAS and, of course, their new reissue. These are only about $1,000 depending on whether you get the strap or the bracelet version. But they retain a lot of the features of the 62 MAS, such as the case style and size, but you've got a somewhat more affordable option if $4,000 for a vintage re-edition is not up your alley. Okay, watch number 4 on our most iconic diver list is the Tudor Black Bay, and that's because before there was ever a Black Bay, Tudor made their own dive watch called the Submariner, just like Rolex. At which time it's important to mention that Tudor is kind of Rolex's pet brand, like Tissot is to Omega, Tudor is to Rolex, and they used oyster cases manufactured by Rolex, their own movements, which were modified ETA movements, but it was still a very robust watch, and these were available all as far back as, the 60s, and they've become collectible in and of themselves. The Black Bay is kind of the modern version of this watch and takes a lot of its heritage from the original Tudor Submariner, and specifically in terms of the dial configuration and the iconic snowflake hand. And if there was one reason that I felt compelled to include this watch on the top 5 most iconic diver list, it's because these snowflake hands are instantly recognizable. They have become synonymous with Tudor divers, in fact Tudor watches in general, now that they've released the Black Bay 36 and 41 with no dive bezel, as well as the Black Bay chronograph, which is arguably not a dive watch either. And so they're putting these snowflake hands and high contrast black dials with white indices on everything they make practically, and that's sort of a Tudor icon in and of itself. Number 3 on our top 5 list today is the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. This is a really iconic dive watch that was used by militaries, or I should say navies in the past, and has seen service since it was delivered to French combat divers in 1953. Of course, since then it has become more of a luxury timepiece, certainly, and it is really on the top of the price scale. I believe the 50 Fathoms is, depending on the model, around $15,000 to $20,000. I mean, it is hot horology piece. It is really up there. Is it worth the money? Well, if you have to ask, the answer is no. But it is truly an iconic dive watch, since it does have that military heritage. It was a purpose-built tool watch, and now it is one of the most iconic and recognizable designs of any dive watch currently available. And again, just this year at Basel 2017, they released a heritage reedition. I promise I'm not doing this on purpose. It just seems to be the year of vintage reeditions. Again, fully acknowledging that this is not a watch for everyone. Certainly not a watch for me, given the price, but it is one of my favorites. I think it's very attractive, but its large size and sort of prohibitive price tag means that I will be content to appreciate from afar. Alright, for watch number 2, we start to get into the meat of the list, which are probably the watches you already know are going to be here, and that is the Omega Seamaster 300. This watch is one of the most recognizable dive watches, one of the most highly sought after dive watches, and one that continues to attract collectors both of the vintage editions and modern references. So the Omega Seamaster 300 is actually different from any of the watches on this list so far, in that its current design is significantly different from what it originally looked like when it was released in 1957. So it has gone through several iterations. One of the most recognizable, of course, is the James Bond. That was released, around the 90s era, and actually is still produced to today. And then, of course, you've got the Master Co-axial Seamaster 300, which was released a few years ago and has been very successful. It's a very attractive design. This became the James Bond watch with Spectre. You'll remember they released a limited edition there with the lollipop hand and the James Bond NATO strap, which has totally taken over the NATO strap market for whatever reason. Black and gray stripes is the new orange or whatever. But it continues to be a really iconic, really recognizable, popular, and excellent watch, frankly. It boasts water resistance that you would expect of a diver, with all the modern features, including sapphire glass. And of course, keeping with the unintentional tradition of this iconic top 5 list, Omega did announce the release of a authentic 1957 reedition also this year at Basel. So depending which reference you want, these can be found for any number of prices. I believe the Seamaster 357 Trilogy is around $7,000. The Master Coaxial, I believe, is about $4,000, $5,000, depending on whether you go gray market or boutique. And then the original 90s Seamaster 300, not the Coaxial, that's closer to the $2,000 to $3,000 mark, depending on whether you buy used or new. So you can go with any option based on your design preference or your budget, and there is a Seamaster 300 diver for you. Finally, of course, we have the number one most iconic dive watch, and possibly the number one most iconic watch, period, the Rolex Submariner. There is not a person, watch collector or otherwise, who cannot recognize the Rolex Submariner. I probably don't even need to justify why this watch is number one on this list. It simply is the watch to own if you want a luxury dive watch. Now, I'm not saying that it is the best value, or anything like that. That's totally up to you to decide, but it is very difficult to argue that it is anything but the single most recognizable, meaningful, iconic, pop culture watch that there is. Think any movie from James Bond to Wolf of Wall Street, and there's probably somebody there wearing a Rolex sub. The fact that the design has remained relatively unchanged since the 50s just gives it that much more credence to being an iconic watch. The hands with the Mercedes-Benz hour hand, loomed second hand, are just instantly recognizable and scream Rolex. They've made some small changes over the years, whether that's to the size of the case, the material in the bezel. Of course, the movement had some updates over the course of its history, and lines of text. Nowadays, of course, there's hardly room for anything on these watches, as Rolex put some more and more information on the dial, and as well as date functions, which of course you can still get one with or without the date. But anyway, let me know what you thought of this top 5. Oh, I do want to mention I have an Instagram. Somebody told me that I should say that here. So follow me on Instagram. My username is CriticalGent. And don't forget to please like or subscribe if you have not already. And thanks again for watching. Take care. Look forward to seeing you next time.